Over here, I wanted to talk about Black Myth Wukong and maybe kind of unpack it a little bit. Why it was so successful, why this game has blown up to become such a big deal, smashing sales records. I mean, the amount sold, the Steam concurrent players, all that. You've probably seen the headlines by now, so I just wanted to unpack it a little bit, do a little bit of a post-mortem, because I find this one very interesting. It's a little different. It's a sign of things possibly to come. And really, I think the first reason why it's doing so well, why it's blown up, why it's taken off with audiences, is the obvious one, because it's good. I mean, if you watched my before you buy video I did on Game Ranks, you already know this from me, but I very much enjoyed playing the game. I think it is very well made. It had a couple of technical issues pre-launch, and it's got a lot of invisible walls, and you can't really do a lot of verticality or too much climbing up things. So there are limited aspects to the game, but ultimately it is a good, straightforward action adventure game. For me, it was really the pacing of it. As much as I didn't like the moment to moment, like random fodder enemies you would face, I found them kind of dull. The amount of bosses and like sub bosses and mid bosses just peppered throughout the game and so expertly paced throughout the game just made it really fun. I found myself continue to play just one more, like let me just get to one more guy. Let me just get through one last boss. That to me was very, very compelling because all of these bosses felt so incredibly unique. This game was hyped up for a long time too. There was that. I was part of that. We talked about it on Game Ranks and stuff like that, but I was really curious to see if it was going to be all hype and if the game was just going to be a graphical showcase more than a game that had the gameplay chops. But for me, it has the gameplay chops. I really love the combat feel. I like all that, but I like that the gameplay is revolved around not just parry or die, like you just have to perfect parry and that's it. Good luck, dude. You do have to learn the enemy patterns and stuff like that, but it's not just parry or die. It's a lot of dodging, of course, but the dodging is somewhat generous, but also it's the fact that the game does give you a lot of other tools to either defend yourself, disrupt the enemy. Those magic abilities, I just really liked unlocking throughout the game and figuring out the best use cases for them. That and also the staff stances. That and biome diversity as well. Every chapter feels expressly different. So not only do you have all this pretty consistent boss variety, you also have this very consistent visual variety. And the game does look really damn good. I absolutely love the art style on display. It's not always for me, especially with something like this. It's not like the ray traced graphics and waterfall and realistic lighting. It's just the detail. It's just the architecture of things, the foliage, the color of the skybox, the color palette just generally in a level. That's the stuff I really like. But another thing that I think is interesting and why it might be doing so well is that the game doesn't immediately brutalize you. It is a very challenging game. It is an ass-kicking, get your ass kicked type of game. That is the thing now. People really like that. And I'm tired of getting my ass beaten games, but I think it works really well here because the game takes a while before it actually starts, beating you into a pulp. Every player is different. This difficulty can be pretty subjective, but for me, I didn't find the game to actually get truly difficult until significantly into chapter 3. That's a hell of a lot of hours into the game before it starts really pushing back at you. So you have all that time to really kind of get around and understand and fall in love with the game. It's not that first boss crushes you to teach you and it ultimately turns some players off. So I think that there was that some level of accessibility there at the start that helped more people jump in. Not only that, but I do think audiences are primed for challenging games still. I've talked about how Elden Ring was such a massive mainstream success for something that always felt like such a niche RPG difficulty thing. I think things are changing in that regard because people definitely aren't slouching at the difficulty for Black Myth. Also, the monkey is cool. That's my genius insight. The monkey is cool as hell. He's kind of badass. I just like his whole deal, his swagger. The silent protagonist thing leaves the story kind of vague, especially when you're going around and you're solving these little extra side activities, like you're kind of uncovering those mysteries. Having the character speak a little bit would have been more interesting, but I think the silent protagonist still can work in games. I'm not against that. And here, he's just kind of always this stoic, cool badass. Whatever armor set you have, he looks cool. Anytime you see him, he just looks rude. Like, I don't know, he's just like a little badass. There's some charm to it. And that charm is throughout the game because of what it's based on. The fact that it's based on Chinese mythology and the novel Journey to the West from the hundreds of years ago gives it a bit of a unique sense of style. It's distinct from the enemies you face off against, to the buildings you see, to the locations you see, to the story trickled throughout. As much as, and maybe it's because I'm not too familiar with Journey to the West, I had trouble really understanding that much of a story through line for a lot of it. Like, I didn't connect with a lot of it. I think the fact that it is centered on these things that were written so long ago that, cultures and people have fell in love with, does just kind of, it's got a little something behind it, That cultural aspect of it is really interesting, and that is definitely the other thing I wanted to talk about in this video, and some of the reason for its success, other than the fact that it is just good, other than the fact that it is just a regular old adventure video game, like no season pass, no battle pass, no it's just regular old bullshit video game, like in a good way. It's its connection to China, and it's something that we haven't seen before. China, the country I frankly don't know too much about, has kind of slowly been bubbling up as a force in the AAA game development scene. This company, Game Science, obviously they're backed by Tencent, the big megacorp, but before this, they've worked on mobile games. There are a lot of other games in the works from Chinese studios that also look like they're getting this big AAA budget feel. So we're seeing new influence come in. We're seeing new heavy hitters come in. We've had so many places just crush it with these big types of games. The United States, Poland, Sweden, obviously Japan. So now China's getting into the mix. To me, it only makes sense because it's such a massive country. There's a questionable thing, like when the game was being distributed to some streamers out there, like the agreement, that for streaming the game and getting access to the game early required people essentially censoring themselves and not stating certain topics like quote unquote feminist propaganda, COVID-19 pandemic, stuff about China. So I think stuff like that should be pushed back upon. And I think especially if you're a streamer or a content creator, you should never agree to terms like that. I don't know if stuff like that is like cultural friction, speed bumps. I don't know. I am definitely not equipped to talk about that whole angle of the conversation, but on the industry side, that's something I can kind of grasp. And what I can grasp is like an audience of people, a bunch of people in China, clearly who love video games. There is and has been a market for many, many years, whether it's mobile games or the popularity of gaming cafes, the fact that the Chinese government has had to restrict gameplay for certain ages and stuff like that. Wild stuff, but again, an audience primed, where now they're getting a game based on something directly from their culture, mythologies and influences from their culture. So it makes sense. A lot of people are going to jump on that. In fact, part of the reason why I'm bringing this up, Japan Times, I'm getting this figure from them. Of course, they point out the impressive record I mentioned earlier, like number 2 overall in terms of all-time concurrent player counts. But they are reporting from Game Discover Co. 3% of Black Myth's player count is coming from the United States and just 1% from Japan. A staggering 89.7% is playing from all of China. From reading these articles, which I will link all in the description down below, some of that comes from Chinese state media hyping up the game. I mean, that's, state media, that's a whole other can of worms. But a lot of other interesting little cultural net positives have been bubbling up, making headlines that I don't think people have seen. Number 1, hotels in China centered around gaming, like gaming hotels where you can book a room and that room happens to have a kick-ass gaming PC or 2 or a LAN setup and some gaming chairs. Apparently, those bookings and searches spiked, actually. Search volume for gaming rooms increased by 40% compared with the previous day. Apparently, tourism is also up in China at specific locations that are significant to the game and mythology. Yahoo is reporting that it's up by 50% in August compared to July. Temple landmarks, pagodas, places like that, there could very much be a direct connection here just because of the sheer popularity of the game. game. And Daniel Ahmad, game analyst on Twitter, often cited for a lot of things, has noted that small businesses in China are actually taking advantage of the game, like bathhouses and stuff are advertising Black Myth Wukong, like come in, stay at our bathhouse, play video games. So I'm curious to see how this goes, because China obviously has been exposed to video games for a long time, but now it's like they're hitting that big cinematic action adventure AAA game mania. Jumping away from China and just talking about worldwide and like the success of this game, the one thing I couldn't really find data on, but I'd be very, very curious to see are the sales numbers for Journey to the West. Journey to the West is a very influential 16th century novel. It's inspired things like Dragon Ball. It's inspired even more recently video games like Enslaved. I mean, I say recently, but that game's like got to be like, what, 10 years old now at this point? But still, it's not new. It's an influential novel, but I still am very curious to see sales numbers for the book now. Is there an increase in interest of this? Are people playing the game and going, oh, I kind of want to know more about this? One of my friends was texting me saying, hey, I got to learn more about this because this game, these bosses are crazy. There's a book about this shit. And I felt the same way playing it. So I think that's cool. And ultimately what I wanted to come around on this, like, obviously China, some political, some aspects, like I don't understand, but I can understand people making video games and playing video games. And I can understand people buying and enjoying video games. So now ultimately the numbers I'm curious to see are the sales on this book. And I think it is definitely going to be a thing. I think if a video game makes some people pick up a book and read, that's also cool. Maybe learn a little bit about world history. That's a win. So I don't know. I just wanted to talk because, you know, everywhere online I've seen the headlines, Black Myth Wukong, Black Myth Wukong. And like we put out a video, we talked about it, and we quickly moved on because the release cycle is insane, like with Star Wars Outlaws and stuff. But Black Myth Wukong is just an interesting one. And I'm really curious to see how things move forward from here. Whether this game influences some of our games, whether China continues to make more games like this. Like I said, there are some things in the pipeline already being made, but yeah, I'm just curious to see how it goes. What if the big industry takeaway from this is that the people want more games where you play as a cool monkey guy? That's my ultimate analysis. But let me know what you think about Black Myth Wukong. If you've been playing it, I definitely want to know what you think about some of the bosses, where maybe you're getting stuck. If you're familiar with the classical novel, of course, like let's talk about this stuff. Then, of course, on the Inside Baseball, the industry stuff, the rise of Chinese game dev, like what do you think about that? I know some people aren't very receptive to it. Either way, I think there's a chat here, so let me know what you think. Either way, thanks for coming around here, listening to me talk about games. On this channel, I'm just trying to talk about stuff I like and stuff I find interesting. So if you get that, clicking the like button really legit helps me, but that's it. All I ask now is that you have a great day. I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games, pizza's on me.